Okay, so we'll get started, and what we have tonight, following last Monday night's meeting, we did receive our preliminary 279 reports. And so what we'd like to do tonight is go through those. Paula, I'm trying to see if Cheryl can forward you the 279s.
Already
if possible. I don't know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Did you get them, Paula?
I gotta go and get my laptop downstairs because I'm upstairs. Let me check real quick on my cell phone as well.
So we did receive our preliminary 279s, which is showing what our funding's going to be in subsidy funding. So we thought it'd be helpful to share that report tonight. What we've done is, as hard copies, you have this year's copy for 2021, 2022. Well, next year's copy, next year's budget, but you also have the one we're currently in, 2020, 2021, for comparison purposes. So Cheryl did a really nice job here putting a PowerPoint together that would basically kind of help us break down that 279 to show us where our funding was. So we're going to go through that tonight, with the idea of, after we get that, you'll see where Cheryl has plugged in some numbers, and that will kind of give us a better idea of the budget that we shared with you, that we've developed to this point. We'll kind of show you exactly where our starting point is. Okay? So we'll start off, and try to monitor that. Okay, we'll start off and
Okay.
Take over.
Okay. So everybody's got their FY 2022 ED 279, because I will reference that on and off throughout the presentation. But let's, how does it work? So what the ED 279 does is it takes your staffing through your that we enter into NEO, and it has some matrices that it runs it through. But I'll explain that more, because that's the most confusing part of it. It takes our enrollment, which is our student counts, and it breaks it up into different categories. Special ed is done a little differently. So is gifted and talented, CTE, transportation. We have a teacher retirement piece that we have to pay a portion of, and debt service, and then property values and mill rate. All of those items make up an ED 279. So next slide, Matt. Okay, so to start out, at the very top of the first page, you'll see there's one little section that shows you the number of students we have, or number of pupils. And it brings it into the category. So it does pre-K to K, 1 to 5, 6 to 8, and then it does a subtotal from pre-K to 8, and then it has your high school group, and then a total. So you'll see that number is done on an average based off last year and this year's pupil counts. So that's very important, because that number actually feeds all the way through this whole presentation. And the reason why I'm bringing that up right now is you can see on your screen right now, there's this matrix over to the left-hand side. It takes our number of pupils and divides it out by, it says, so pre-K and K should have 15 students per class or per teacher. So that takes the matrix and brings you into how much money we can get. So that one with the big red arrow, if you can see on the right-hand side, the law, A1, they have adjusted for 1 year the number of students to be in a classroom to 16 instead of 17. We're going to talk about that a little more later, but it actually gives us an additional $291,000 of funding because of that. So that gets important a little bit further on. Next slide.
And I just want to jump in too, because when they're talking about enrollments, they're looking like averages of what we had reported this past October and last year's October. And so remember, we had less students this October. And so I say that because that is also going to be part of the average next year with that. Last year's number for October of 2019, we had a high enrollment. Okay, so that we did lose some students, and Cheryl will talk about that, but the averaging buffered that a little bit.
Right. I think we lost about 124 students, but because you average it, you don't lose all 124 students all at once, technically, because you do half. Okay, so this is where the matrix actually kind of gets busy. One of my little circles disappeared, but that's all right. So what it does is section 1 is kind of broken up into different segments, and what it's going to do is create an ending result that will be an average per pupil that gets used later on. But so the EPS formula takes your FTEs and gets it to an EPS FTE, which is what these DOE says we should, the number of teachers we should have on staff to take care of the students we have listed. So that being said, just to the left of the circle that says B, that's what the DOE says we should have for number of teachers. Then when you look at B, which is what we supplied to the DOE as our number of staffing, you can see that number actually is, some are lower, some are higher. That actually creates the next column over, which is the percentage of EPS. That percentage of EPS tells us how much of that column D we're going to get. So technically 1.12 is 112% of column D. So that means we had less staffing than the formula says we should. That's a good thing because we get more funding when we do that. So I think as Matt kind of explained it when I was talking to him earlier, is that that's what the EPS formula matrix says, that's the floor. And if you pay more than that, we actually have to front that. Because
so EPS will stand for Essential Programs and Services. So these ratios and FTEs that have been established by the Department of Education, don't look at those as like a ceiling. You look at those as like a floor. And then anything that we want to do locally, we have the ability to add, but the formula will not support that as fully as it would if you were at the floor or below.
Right. So if you look at that matrix, that colorful matrix off to the left, column D uses that matrix, takes each of those people that we have in our listing and actually takes it and gives you the funding that it says in that orange section to actually create column D. Now, I did it myself without them before they actually, and I was pretty close on most of them. So I at least figured it out. So that's saying that if we pay somebody with that degree and they've been there 11 years and we pay them $70,000, it just means that we have to front that additional cost for that teacher. So that's just kind of how it kind of works. So I know there's a lot of information really quick, but we're just trying to give you the kind of flavor of what's happening. So then it takes your adjusted EPS formula, which is to the right of D. That is after you multiply it by the percentage of EPS. So based off our FTEs compared to the DOE's estimated deal, staffing. And then what it does at the end is it just creates, back when it did the number of pupils, it tells you what percentage are actually elementary school and what percentage of it is secondary. And so it automatically takes that percentage and does it to all categories going down through in this section. So that's why it's a little bit important that we have all of our students listed where they should be.
Mhm.
Any questions on that section? Because I know this section's a little more involved. The next sections get easier. Okay, next slide, Matt. If there's no questions. So when we get to the bottom of section 1, because section 1, how I kind of said that we were getting down to a bottom of number of what the average cost per pupil is. So what it did is, if you see the numbers on the left-hand side in yellow, I put last year's number and this year's number. Now, this whole section, throughout the whole section, it does averages, it does staffing levels, it takes some other support categories like supplies, substitute teachers is done on an average cost. I don't know, that's the only mystery, a little bit of a mystery for me, is how they get that average cost. But they have a set rate that they give us, so everybody is the same on that one. And it goes by the number of pupils you have, again, in the different categories. So it does an average going down through. So we actually, Sanford gets a regionalization addition of 3%, and it does it on that section we talked about in the last slide, plus the substitutes. We get an extra 3% added to our average cost. So
That's a visualization throughout the state. Looking at it, there are differences for parts of the state. Where we are in the southern part of the state, that's kind of like the way to be able to adjust for how those costs would be different.
Right. So this whole section 1 really actually gave us an additional $335,000 throughout the whole EPS formula. So just remember though, out of that 735,000, 291,000 of it is due to that one change they made with having 17 students per teacher versus 6 in the 1 through 5 grades. So that's going to be a 1 year up. We won't get that continued. So just wanted to remind people that number. Next slide. So section 2, we start getting into a little bit of a different piece. So that's on page 2. And then this section takes all of those pupil numbers and divides it out into different categories. So it does a basic count, and it gives you one rate, and then it also gives you additional weighted counts or additional money based on different categories like disadvantaged kids, English learners. Then it's got some targeted funds which are supposed to be utilized for certain pieces, which are the student assessments, technology resources, pre-K, K through 2, and disadvantaged kids again. This whole section, because of the changes in the number of students, actually decreased our funding by about $352,000. Now, primary reason is it's down 28.5 students. At first, we thought disadvantaged kids were actually going to decrease us, but we ended up being pretty close to the same percentage as last year. We actually ended up with additional funding of $19,000 for that. So that was good, because that was one of our big concerns throughout this whole process. Any questions?
But I think what you're going to see, though, just again, right, Cheryl, next year when you factor in those averages, they're going to be down, correct? Because this year was down significantly.
Yeah, we'll hope that some of those kids come back.
Correct. And when you look at it, in essence, 28 and a half students less who are going through the formula earning you subsidy.
Right. Excellent. Yep. So section 3 is actually, now these are done based off prior years, most of this. So gifted and talented is actually based off the expenses from 2019, 2020, for example. So we get a portion of that, and actually we get 101.8% of that. I don't know how they get the 101.8%. I have not found anything on that piece yet, but I'm still researching that one. But it's not a huge number.
Something that we get reimbursed fully.
Yeah. Yeah. And then,
That's an actual expense from the years before.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at.
But when we get down below, it won't be because of, it might be because of less students, Amy, but it won't be because of.
Cheryl, isn't 101.8 talks about inflation? Isn't that a 1.8 COLA? Isn't that kind of what that would be?
I think that's what it is, because last year it was 102 point something. Last year was 102
Seems like
point, which I believe. Right, and 2.2, I believe, was the inflation rate last year, if I remember right. So that's probably it, but I'm only assuming because I have not found anything in writing to tell me that. So I'm still looking for that answer. So special ed is similar. They go off prior years, high dollar claims. Also, the high cost out of district claims are the prior year. Transportation is also prior year. And so those ones are based off prior years, and that gets added into our formula. And so there's another formula for all of those that I'm still digging into to get definitely more concrete information and understand it. But those ones are part of that. The next step is also the teacher retirement. The teacher retirement is a number that Maine PERS gives DOE to add to our funding. So that's that piece. And then, of course, debt. Debt is all those pass-through, those ones that we pay out in expense, but we get the money back from the DOE for all of our construction. And I thought we were going to lose some money there, but we didn't, because that's the additional funding for the new bond was a small one that started last year too. So we ended up with a decrease of funding of 110,000. The majority of that is the teacher retirement went down 67,000, and the debt went down 29,000. So that is what that cost is. So section 3. So section 4, this is where the so they take all those sections and they get down and say, this is the amount of your subsidy, but there's now going to tell you how much money that we have to pay of that. So there's a formula for that. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see the values. Now I did it in the thousands only because you get too many zeros, you kind of look cross-eyed. But so in 2021, last year's funding, it was 1.4 million. And then in this year, it's 1.2 million. Well, it's actually billion. But to make the number a little smaller, I did it in thousands. So Stanford's value increased by $72 million. So people are like, oh, good, we got extra value, but that actually does cause us to have to pay a little more in our own local funding. So we would have lost $592,000 in funding if it was just strictly on value, but they actually lowered the mill rate, which was good for us because that actually gives us money back, and that gives us back $420,000. So that net decrease was $171,000. At first, when I heard about what our value was going to be, I was really nervous because I thought we were gonna lose $592,000 worth of funding. So thankfully, they changed the mill rate, which helped us out. Next. Oh. So the next grouping, so after it does that, it takes off what we say that we have to pay out of the local funds to pay for the schooling. It then adds in at the very end, our CTE funding, which runs through its own formula. Similar to this big formula, there's another big formula for CTE. It's a little less confusing, but definitely still 2 pages worth of taking the data and creating a funding for it. It does similar with the average rates of pay and stuff like the number of pupils. So it does do very similar things. We get extra funding for being part of the Education Service Center, and because we're a member of that. And then, of course, Maine Care Seed, actually, they give us money and then they take it out of our funding. And that doesn't show up in our funding right now because it gets done every month as we go throughout the year. Because they don't know what that funding will be because it depends on what we do for Medicare claims. So the CTE actually went up $158,000, but out of that $158,000, $100,000 of that is for the new plumbing program, because they give us dollar for dollar for the new program. So this section actually increased our funding by about $224,000. Any questions? Okay. Next slide. So did you keep track of all those numbers? I did for you. So, so our total funding increased by $324,000. So how does that work out? So the total municipal allocation was 47.5-ish $47.5 million. The local funding, which I talked about in section 5, was 11.9 million, bringing us down to a total subsidy of 35.6. And then you add in section 5, which was your CTE and our Education Service Center, and then we're back up to 39.2 million, 39.3 million. That breaks down as 10.5 million of it is for debt service, and the rest of it is the subsidy for our to take care of our kids. So next slide. So here we go. So this is where we gave you a budget and the total expenses. If you look at the bottom, towards the bottom right, there's $57.7 million. That was our total general fund expenses. You see the adult education total expenses, just a little bit under that at $609,000. But once you take out the revenue from above, because that's all the revenue up at the top section, we have the $39.3 million worth of subsidy. Those are the 2 items in blue, because that was what the rest of the presentation was about. There's some other funding of revenue, which is a bunch of miscellaneous stuff like tuition, rental receipts and stuff like that of just over $1 million. And then we have adult education dollars that come in, and we get money from Noble for sharing Nicole for adult education. So at the very bottom, the amount that we're going to be getting, that we're going to be asking for at this moment is $17.8 million worth of money that needs to go to the taxpayers. That is up 14.4%, but there's a couple of reasons why. So on the next slide, don't get too nervous yet.
I don't want people, so I'm just take a break to make sure everyone's still breathing.
It seemed like that was a good job, so I was gonna be doing like.
Lane is gonna.
Okay, so ready?
Any questions? Yeah. The
All
next,
right, here we go.
yeah, I wish I wish I could have figured out a way to get these two slides on one, but I couldn't do it. So the city warrant, which is what I kind of showed you in the before, went up $2.2 million, which is that 14.4%. Now, if we decide to take out pre-K, because we've talked about that, pre-K is actually would have been a new program we had put in for 6 classes of pre-K. And that's part of Article 1. If we take that out, it brings us down to $1.3 million increase, which is 8.4%. Then we found out that our health insurance for Harvard is probably going to stay status quo for a rate. So that will take out $349,000, and that's throughout all the articles, because it's a lot of different people get touched with that. And so that would bring us down.
I want to add into that is right now, we don't get our number from Harvard Pilgrim until another month from now. Okay, so there is a qualifier there that is, we're still waiting, so there is still some time that could, but all indications are that we are in line for what is called a rate hold. They don't see a rate increase coming. So with that rate hold, that's where we felt, remember, because this budget was originally built on a 5% increase. So when you take that out for just, if we're talking Harvard Pilgrim right now, then that's where you're able to take it down almost $350,000. And so that, when you look at pre-K and the health insurance, you go from 14.4 to a 6.2% increase. And then Cheryl, I'll let you talk about the new debt, because that is something, remember, last year we just paid interest only. This year we're paying interest and principal. So that additional money that gets added into our budget is the $430,262.
Right. So if you take out the 430,000, if for just turning the page and keeping everything status quo, our increase would have been $526,000, which is a 3.4% increase. So, which I feel is a little more reasonable than the 14.4. It's kind of deceiving. So we wanted to make sure we showed a little bit more information about that number. I did put a little disclaimer at the bottom of this that for every 100,000, that makes our percentage go down or up by 0.6%. So just, I put that in there for you just because I know Jonathan was going to ask me.
No, I'm a little tired. Okay, Cheryl, right?
And so.
You said we don't do pre-K.
It's in there now.
It's in there right now as part of that. When you see a 14.4% increase, just saying, whoa, one of the ads that's in there right now is that pre-K program.
Right. I just wanted to highlight that.
Hey, so Cheryl, with the new debt part, that 430,000.
Yep.
That's something where, I mean, because we have to pay that, right, as a municipality. So if we don't have it in our budget, where does that go to?
It's in our budget. It's in our budget right now. But what I was trying to do is get down to telling you what status quo, what that budget would have looked like, and that would have had an increase of the 526,000, because that 430,000 is something that was not in the budget last year.
I got you. So you're trying to apples to apples from last year.
Yep.
But that 430,000 isn't something that we can just say, hey, we're not going to pay that.
No.
So that is really.
No.
Nope.
I just want to make.
Signed off. Have to pay it. But right.
Matt, since this is starting to get Hanselman's name on there.
I think Ann's the only public we have on.
And I guess being an accountant, I was just gonna ask Ann if there was any questions she had at this point.
John?
Yep, she just. Thanks, Dan.
I really appreciate that. I'm just watching to stay informed, but thank you so much.
Okay, well, I know you came to every meeting last year, and I just wanted to make sure, you know, if you had something, some questions, I know you're an advocate, so I wanted you to be in the loop.
We value your opinion, Ann.
Thank you.
Make it an honorary school committee member, how's it feel? Okay.
So that's the end of my presentation. Of course, I'll answer any questions I can. I'm still learning a little bit about this, but I've dug in quite a bit, so I've been kind of watching it, so.
You know, I like the way you pointed out the fact that there's that 291,000, I think it was, from the ratio change, which is a
Right.
1-year thing.
Correct.
Definitely something to keep in
Right,
forward.
right. At least, if you took that off the top of the 324,000, we still would have had an increase in funding, just not as much. But it's still at least a reasonable amount. I feel a lot better because, you know, there was a lot of doomsday clouds there about our funding, you know, back when I first, you know, when all of this was being talked about over the summer. So I was really pleased to see us actually have an increase.
We thought it was gonna be a 10% cut.
So can you talk about that for a minute? Because if the state goes back to the formula, that's $292,000, but we need to get more students back in the school.
To offset that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that, the hope is that that's not just gonna be a hole, that the students that we lost in that enrollment on October 1st, we've gotta bring that number back up, and the hope is that that can offset that.
So in spirit of education here, a lot of parents that took their students out and categorized them as homeschooling was really more of a COVID safety concern, don't you think? There's probably not a great deal of quality homeschooling going on. I know that's not fair of me to say.
Yeah, I think in some situations, we already had homeschoolers that were doing a really good job.
Sure.
I think a lot of the increase was in result of a couple things. COVID, obviously, concerns about that, and also maybe some dissatisfaction with the options that people had, and also saying, I think I can homeschool better than some of the, and we know that in terms of our meetings last fall, whether it be those learning platforms that we had at different levels. And so, yeah, there's a combination of those.
I just needed to hear this conversation out loud as to how it might change the students coming back into the school system with this formula adjustment. Somewhere in the middle, probably.
I think part of it is that survey from Monday night where the kids that were remote now want to stay remote. Could you capture some of those homeschool kids coming back in, maybe not into the building physically, but if we still offer a remote option next year, pull that back. I think that is a demographic that's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be hard to reach. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out going into next year.
Well, it's a national concern. It's all about the vaccine. It's all about confidence in our economy and safety, and the things outside of our control.
Yeah, and when people make the decision to homeschool, probably even prior to the pandemic, a lot of that can depend on different things. And if we do have a platform for people that remotely, they might be able to say, you know what, rather than us trying to put in a homeschool curriculum, there it is for us right there. Now, that's also, we don't have any hard data on that. So that's a
hypothesis.
Yes.
Hey, Cheryl, with the SRTC money, the plumbing is included in that, correct?
Yep. For dollar.
An estimate of what we think it's going to cost?
Yep, 107, yep.
What was it, 107?
Cheryl.
100,700.
Cheryl, that's immediate dollars. We're not waiting for that money, correct? I believe.
Correct.
Right, it's not. Now, what will happen is, in the event that, worst case scenario, if we don't run the program,
Right.
we don't get to keep that money, that has to go back. Right.
I just was wondering how much was in there, but, you know, because that's one thing where you want to make sure you don't go over that, because that's, but then the year following will be actual expense.
I guess that,
5 gallon buckets.
I guess that also just depends also on if we're, you know, whether we find a great plumber to teach the class and about what they're gonna want to be paid and whatnot, right? Because that money would come out of the educator, or is it only coming out of to teach it, the supplies, everything else to run that program?
It's pretty much every,
There should be instructor benefits,
yes,
supplies.
supplies, yes.
That actually opens up another
Not
conversation.
seem like a lot of money.
So that's another conversation we've had about the instructors for the tech center and where they come in on the pay scale, and you're trying to get some of this experience, so that's
We're just gonna be fixing.
another one of
kitchen
those
sinks.
rabbit holes to follow.
We're just gonna be fixing kitchen sinks the first year.
I guess so.
Well,
It's a step in the right direction.
And it may be a future conversation for Kathy Sargent at SRTC. Amy, if you're gonna be at the SRTC Advisory Committee Friday, you might wanna bring that up. And I mention that just because I think Kathy is looking at a certain type of a person for that instructor role, maybe somebody who's more towards the end of their career, more towards retirement, to be able to do that, because we all know, if you look at a plumber's salary, for them to come in and teach, and Kathy mentioned that to us earlier when she talked about the program, there's a concern there. Obviously, there's advantages for people to come and be part of the school year, but financially, it usually means people taking pay cuts coming from the business sector into
I
education.
mean, yeah, you're right. Ideally, you want to find someone at the end of their career, they're tired of climbing around doing stuff. They want to pass that knowledge on to another generation. You know, so that's really who you're looking for the instructors, but I mean, it's hard to find people like that.
So I'd also, so as you sit here right now, we are minus the pre-K, and with that health insurance adjustment, we're sitting at a 6.2% increase. Over half of that is our new debt that we have with our principal payments. So I would like to spend some time, though, tonight going over, there are some things that people wanted to add into this budget that we didn't add, and I want to be right up front with that. And then there are also some potential cuts that have not been made either, that also might be able to impact that number a little bit. So if it's okay with people, I'll be able to try to share some of those things right now.
Sounds like the next logical step.
Can I just ask one thing?
Yeah, ask as many as you like, Katie.
So, you know, we were going through and I have like transportation in bold and like question mark. And I'm sure, and I don't mean to reinvent the wheel because it just seems like an obvious situation that probably you guys have already talked about, is the transportation, because it is such a large number, and how some schools don't outsource it, some schools buy their own buses and all that, and I realize it's a headache, and then, you know, the mess that that entails. But Sanford has always outsourced busing, or have we ever owned our own buses?
I know they had the activity bus.
I
think they used to have their own
Going
bus
back
for
as
a while.
long as I can remember, I don't think we've ever owned our own.
7 years ago, we owned like 4 tire-old buses. But
They were for, you know, sports and after-school stuff and all that. Well, I think we did, is memory correct, but I thought that at one point Gwen and Steve had actually looked at kind of a rough analysis of what it would cost to get back into the busing game.
Mm-hmm.
And having to purchase all the buses and then maintenance on them. And then, of course, if you have the buses, you also have to either have somebody on for maintenance or outsource that. Getting the bus drivers with benefits and all that.
Hiring, drug testing, there's a lot of
Just the
things.
cost effectiveness was not there.
And so, Cheryl, can I put you on the spot, though, in terms of what we receive from the DOE for subsidy for transportation?
Yep.
And what that costs us? Because what we usually do is, what has been typical is within our contracts, it's basically a 3% increase. A 3% increase is what we're looking at. So I think to help get a better idea for Amy's question, is you can see how short do we come up there? Is probably, how much do the DOE not fund that we have to take on locally?
Okay, hold on a second, gotta find the page.
No pressure, Cheryl, no
Well, I know I was
pressure.
putting you on the spot,
We'll
but
put
I think,
No, no problem.
Tell us.
Okay, so we actually spend out just over, the budget for this current year we're in is just over $2 million. So I believe, my understanding is we get 90% of the amount that was done in 2020 in this year with the 101.8 multiplier. Make sense?
and so does that, and crunch your numbers there, Cheryl, so we can get a sense maybe through that to see.
Because, of course, this is this year's budget, which wouldn't be what we're getting it on, but if you take 90% of the 2 million, it comes out to $1.8 million, which we're gonna get just under 1.8. So probably with inflation for a couple of years, because it's based off the 2020 year expense, the money we get this year in our ED 279.
We have a busing contract, so whatever expenses are.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much a fixed cost for us for the most part. When it comes to our outside placements and our athletic trips, those can fluctuate a little bit.
Right.
In some cases with outside placements, it could fluctuate more than a little bit.
An area that we ought to talk about at some point, probably a little late now, but several years ago, the state only allowed private schools to use 15 passenger buses. That's going to be more acceptable today. So whether we can fund some smaller buses to allow coaches to take the golf team, I don't know, the smaller teams.
Cross country.
Right, that may come back into vogue soon.
Yep, and you're right, there are some guidelines that we have to follow, but there are some situations where that allows us to do that, whereas we wouldn't have to contract through Ledgmere and pay extra costs.
Yeah, but so that's another one of those things where you've got to come up with the capital to get the piece of equipment to begin with. So that's just trying to fit that in the budget when we're trying to not cut anything more than we have to. It's like a vicious cycle to me. Like you could save this money if you could buy this bus, but you could never get the money to buy the small bus.
We could find a way.
So, private donations. Sponsorship.
No.
It could be the YCCC.
As long as I get to paint it the way I want.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm not clear on what the answer is. So with the transportation, we get reimbursed.
So we get reimbursed from the cost that was from last year, which was fiscal year 2019, 2020. We get that 90% of that amount. So I'm actually looking at the number right now.
That's what I was just gonna say, that's an easy way to look at it.
Okay.
We're pretty much covering 10%
Okay,
of the transportation every year out of the local
okay,
support.
thank you.
Yeah,
The state.
it's a little confusing.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now is go over some things that, as we met with and did our review of the budget, things that are not included in that budget. Remember what we were talking about. Here we are looking at getting good news for what we initially feared for the 279, and we're still looking at a 6.2% increase. Okay, so I just want to go over some potential adds that were not in this budget. Usually in athletics, we've been looking at assistant athletic director position. That didn't even enter the discussion, but we put it on the list. One of the things that we were looking to do was expand our lacrosse program down to the middle school. To do that, to offer middle school lacrosse would be an additional $25,000. At Carl J. Lamb, we're looking for having a support and an Ed Tech 3 in the support and transitions room. That would have been over 53,000. We're also trying to find kindergarten ed techs. Remember, we share them one for every 2 classrooms. Adding those would be able to give us 1 to each classroom. That's more 69,000. We still have ed techs in the budget for kindergarten and first grade, but they are shared 1 for every 2 grades.
Is that part of the 950?
Right now, that is part of our increase, yep. We have first grade literacy ed tech. That was something else. There was a request to have that at Carl J. Lamb. And then we're also looking at an additional school counselor to share at our elementaries. We put that under Carl J. Lamb, but that was something, and those, for our veterans on the committee, nothing there is new. That was stuff that we had originally were looking last year. This year, we did not put that in the budget. At the high school, one of the things they were looking at was an additional art teacher to help people be able to get their electives, to be able to do that for their schedule, not in the budget.
What's the cost of it?
The cost would be salary and benefits. We've pegged that at $85,323.
What about, you talked about CJL and the school counselor. Was that one of the same? What was the price on that?
Yes, it says 54, but that does make me think that is low. As I look at that,
Is that like a half time?
yeah, that makes me wonder if that doesn't seem accurate. At Margaret Chase Smith, we were also looking at an ed tech for the support and transition room, similar to what we had at Carl J. Lamb. We're also looking at for an administrative assistant for our school year, only administrative assistant. We're looking at adding an additional 10 days. They can come in before the school year starts to help us get ready for the school year. At the middle school, we don't have an administrative assistant at the in the nurse's office. We have that currently this year, but that is being covered by Corona relief funds. All right, so to have that in the budget, that would be $34,679. We also have a school year administrative assistant at the middle school. That we currently have that position now, but it's a Corona relief funds. They're also
real quickly, those Corona relief funds, those acronyms that we used the other night, will any of those carry over to this year's budget?
They could if we want them to. Remember that those positions,
sure.
yeah, with that. But yes, right now those have been extended, and on the surface here, it feels like that would meet the criteria. Okay. Also, an allied arts teacher to be able to help them with their schedule there. So that's another salary and benefits, $85,323. We have a sabbatical request. That would also, the cost there is $17,234 for the long-term sub. And then also looking at a math interventionist teaching position at the middle school. At the Sanford Performing Arts Center, looking at some administrative help, 20 hours a week. And then also humidification for piano. That's not in the budget. That's something that they're going to be looking to do. Brett's looking to do possibly in other ways. In the special education budget, 3 positions not in there. We have a resource room teacher at Margaret Chase Smith School. We currently have that position this year. We added that in this year to help us with our compliance numbers, and we were able to do that with Corona relief funds. IEP coordinator at Willard. Right now, all of our schools have IEP coordinators except what is going to be the converted elementary school next year. And then we also have a district-wide psychologist position as well. Those are not in the budget. For technology, Joan Wright was looking to have another Ed Tech 3 to assist with technology, not in the budget. Willard, that IEP coordinator, is already listed up above under special education. Also looking to add 10 days for their school year administrative assistant, especially with kindergarten next year going to the converted elementary school. And then also looking for a phone to support and transition room and a stipend to run homework club. So those are things right now that, as we met with the administrators, as they're looking at, that things that they'd like to have. With that, these are not in the budget. There are some potential adjustments and cuts. These are in the budget, but they haven't been made yet.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Yep.
While we're looking at all the different schools, it will be super helpful for me to just have the numbers of what each school has. So for instance, how many students are at, like when you're looking at Carl Lamb and they are like whoever, IEP coordinator needed for Willard. So like, if I'm assuming they don't have one is what you just said. So how many students are at Willard? How many students are at Carl Lamb? Just so that when we're doing it, kind of.
We can look at giving some of the projected enrollments next year. That probably will help you. We're trying to remember with the 3 elementary schools that we have, we are trying to make an effort to make sure that their resources are consistent and equitable, but we're also trying to do our best with some of the enrollments. It won't be perfect, right? But you're going to see that this year. There are less students this year at Willard than the other 2 elementary schools. Steve, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, Matthew, you explained it correctly. 3 elementary schools trying to provide equitable resources and equal enrollments as we move forward, and it's going to take some time to get there. I think over the past couple of years, we've tried to plan for having 3 elementary schools, and so I think.
But they're about, but then like the middle school approximately has 500 students and the high school's got approximately 1,000.
No, you're looking at, well, they're pretty, the high school is more.
It's even, right?
But it should be even because you're looking at 4 grades. Grades 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10, 11, 12.
And when we talk
I guess
about,
I'm saying that because the nursing assistant, the high school has a nursing assistant, the junior high does not have a nursing assistant. So my point was trying to see what's fair is fair and even.
Yeah. And what I was trying to say was, we're going with this year's budget, turning it over. They weren't in the budget. Some of those positions we were able to fill in with Corona relief funds with that. And that also can be some things that, remember, we're looking at trying to avoid the cliff, but there are also some things that we may be able to want to plug in there as well.
and that's going to soften the pain for a year.
Yeah, that's the bigger.
So anything for Willard is actually going to be the new elementary school next year, knock on wood.
Yes, sir. Okay, any questions on those ads? Okay, there are some things that were in the budget that are possible cuts or some adjustments. Remember, when times have been tough in the past, one of the things that comes in under athletics would be our freshman programs, first teams, which aren't always just freshmen, but it could be maybe freshmen and sophomores. Okay, if we were to eliminate those, you'd be looking at saving $60,373. Remember, I'm not, by listing these, I'm not advocating any of these. I'm just letting you know.
We put that back in 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah, we've had a situation where they were removed, and then we had a plan to add them back in with athletics, and Gordy had prioritized those as the first priority. So we did put those in. Some of the other ones, for example, the middle school lacrosse, we didn't get to that point.
But there would still be JV and varsity, there just wouldn't be freshman team.
Correct. And we don't have freshman programs in all programs. Some we do, some that we don't, some we plan for and don't have. In the high school, they pay a stipend for after-school detention. At MCS, there was a scholastic order in there. At SRTC, they had a program called Stuken that drew my attention. At CJL, there were some art supplies that I feel like we might be able to go other ways. Special education, at the Morrison Center, they're charging us for an ed tech. We don't believe that that is necessary, and we're confident with that. And then in technology, we were able to put in some the controls to be able to upgrade those. There would be the savings there, okay?
Where would those go? Where are you putting controls?
Good.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to dig into it. No, I'm gonna have to dig into it and find it, but that could be something, according to Joan, if I have it right, that the COPS grant that we had would be able to, has covered those with
I
that.
mean, for the most part, we got 3 new schools, so it's like, what's left?
Yep. And then some other things that are in the budget that I want to point out under athletics. We don't have an assistant athletic director. Instead, we use that as a stipend for athletic support. The field maintenance, we pay the city $25,000 for their ability to help us with all of the fertilizer and all of the grass cutting. For us to use Goodall Field for baseball, we have to pay the city $2,000 for that. That being said, it's one of the premier places to play in the state of Maine. Curriculum, we are looking to replace the RTI coordinator with the literacy coach for elementary schools. That makes a lot of sense in terms of how we can equal out services. Also, at the, we've never had the chemical hygiene officer stipend in the budget. That's in there this year. That's been pointed out in our accreditation. We also have the assistant facilities director in there. Also looking to move the Memorial Gym custodian once we're not in that next year to the high school. We talked about the plumber program. Technology, looking at an extra 10 days for 2 of their ed techs already, which I think you understand the importance of that with the technology that we have to come in before school starts. And then we also, looking at the converted elementary school, we did increase that equipment budget as we've looked at that to make sure that they can have $27,000 for that.
And that's all stuff that's in the budget currently.
Yes,
right?
this is stuff that's in there. And then we also look at potential carryover. Remember, right? What are some of the things we might be able to pay for right now with ESSER funds, the facility upgrade bond, or athletics? Or the carryover. For athletics, there's a middle school uniforms, middle school soccer goals, and an installation of the batting cages over at the high school gym. And those are some things we've looked at as possibly for carryover to address those. Carl J. Lamb, we need some replacement shades and screens. We can do that through the bond. Some playground equipment at Carl J. Lamb. We're looking at the CIP for that. Playground drainage there has been an issue. Fence around the parking lot. 2 new chairs in their main office. Also some security mirrors. Then maintenance, looking at purchasing a box truck now. And also the wall ball at Carl J. Lamb needs to be improved. And then some copiers at Carl J. Lamb, the middle school, and MCS. And then one thing Brett was able to identify in the Performing Arts Center, there's some moving lights because with COVID, unfortunately, you have some theaters that are closing. So it's a great deal to be able to come in and do that for that. And we had taught in athletics, there are some assumptions we're making in that budget that we're increasing travel by 3%. All of our officials, there's fees we pay for them. We projected a 50-cent increase per official. Remember, unified basketball. That was something that we also didn't have in the budget in the past. It is in the budget this year. That's the cost to run that. And then we're also looking to see if we can have track at the middle school for outdoor track. A lot of that comes back to if we allow sixth graders, they usually have big interest in that. We need to have another stipend to pay for the supervision for the safety.
Can I ask you one thing before you go? I just was thinking, looking outside the box with the copiers for the 3 elementary schools. Is there a chance that we could justify using COVID money, being that a lot of kids are at home, computers aren't working, teachers need to photocopy stuff to send home with the kids, I feel like there's maybe some justifications that we could use COVID money for that 27,000.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Cheryl, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we could, that's one thing we could try to put through on the next SR2 funds and see if we can get through that. Definitely.
Yeah, but I think with that, it makes sense to apply in that application. And then if it's accepted, great. If it's not, then we know.
Yeah, what are the restrictions with that next wave of federal money coming in? Is it kind of the same as it has been? It needs to be COVID related, or is this just?
As we mentioned last Monday, those have been loosened.
Yeah.
On that, you're still looking at a focus on air quality and learning loss. But I have that right, Cheryl, right? That we've been led to believe that that's going to be more of a less restrictions on that.
Yeah, all they keep hammering through us every time I think we're on a meeting is it because of COVID? Do you need this item because of COVID? And so if it can fit into that bill, it's pretty much, as long as you can speak to that, and it's not replacing an item. You can't replace an item.
These would be mostly adding.
You would need it because the copier is getting extra use for all the work that needs to be sent home with these kids.
Yep. Well done. Move on.
If you would
You
like
got
to
it.
see it at my house.
No, this is being recorded.
Matt, I did find the transportation, if anybody wants to see that. You just have to let me share my screen and I can show how the transportation amount is determined.
All right, you're the co-host now, Cheryl, so you should be able to share it.
Okay. Did it? So do you see it? Like, do you see my motorcycle or do you see the spreadsheet? Okay, so this is our calculation. I hid all the other schools except for the state total, so you could kind of see what the state total was. But this is how it works. The first column is the amount that we received last year in our funding. They take that number, multiply it by 101.8, which then they get the $1,761,000. Then in column 3, that's the exact expense that we had last year in our actual expenses. They multiply that by 105%. That is your maximum. That's the most you could ever get. So if your amount is higher than that, that would be your cap. Column 5 is taking that amount from column 3 and multiplying it by 90%. That would be the least you would ever get. But because the first column 1 and 2, which is actually technically column 2, is higher, we get that amount. So in our funding, we get the $1,761,000. So if we were to go back to doing our own buses, we are always going to be capped, and we would not get extra funding.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
From
Someone tried to. Speak. Okay,
So you want to jump back to what you had up just before, Matt, with the proposals and all that stuff, because that's probably the next talking point.
well, there's that, and I also know that we've got meetings coming up, and I wondered if we wanted to, oops,
Don't leave the meeting.
yeah, don't want to do that, there we go, all right. I wondered if we, want to, we've got some budgets that are usually ones that people might want to take an extra closer look at. Some of the ones that I'm looking at, potentially are, maintenance, facilities and maintenance with Don Nichols, technology with Joan Wright, curriculum with Beth Lambert, and special education with Stacy Bissell. Typically, we've had those people in the past sometimes come in and present. And so I didn't know with our two meetings next week and two meetings, if we wanted to assign one person to each meeting, because if so, I want to give them a heads up about those could be where they're coming in. But I also think we now have at least an idea somewhat, and then it's going to have to be, how do we, with what we have at our disposal, what are those things that we want to use to either address positions that are not in here, or things that we can do to help bring down that tax increase.
You know, Matt, it's kind of hard to even talk about ads when we're looking at a 6.2% increase without looking at subtractions.
You need some offsets.
So we need some offsets here, exactly. I mean, the key, because when we were there last year, and we knew right out of the gate that was just not going to fly. We had to be in 2.5%, 3%, or 3.5%, I think. Starting with a starting point of 6.2, that's just a plain deal breaker. I hate to say that, but it's just the reality.
That's realistic. So I think the discussion to have, if you want to start talking that, is now we have the federal funds, the COVID funds. How much of that do we want to put in to kind of even it out for that 1 year without, getting too close to the edge of the cliff?
I look at the nurse and assistant in certain positions like that. It's not going to get easier for those offices, the nursing offices next year. So we can put any, and talk again, being cautious of falling off that cliff the following year. But if we know for the next year, we're still going to have those same issues come September, that they're going to be overworked and understaffed. So we put it in, to get us through that year. Those would be the things I could get on board with. Again, food for thought.
Yeah, but even if we look at like all this list of potential cuts, if you did every single one of those, what's that, like 0.5%?
A little bit more.
A little bit more, but not much, right?
Yeah, it's 0.6 for every 100, and you're looking at 160 there with it. But part of that is, I think we'll have more information. Remember, this was as of, we can be
pull it together since Monday.
Yeah, we can be able to. Yeah, we can check on that. Well, some of that was also when we went and met with people individually on their budgets, which would have been
a month ago?
No, it would have been back at the beginning of the month with that. So we may have some ideas. I just, typically in the past, I would have probably already cut some of these things if I knew, but I think in this budget, a lot of it is presenting out there what we've got and what we've got for strategies, what we've got for challenges.
And I think this is a great starting point, Matt. Thank you for doing it that way. I would like to hear from Amy or Paula being their first year in, just some feedback to what you've, I guess I don't want to steal the thunder here. This is what we've been doing, but I'd like to hear something from you guys without putting you on the spot, if you know.
I've done a lot of talking already. Paula, you want to go and then I'll go?
Coward.
I have no problem.
I'm having a hard time hearing. It sounds kind of muffled. Can you repeat that again, John?
I forgot what I said. No, I really wanted to hear what you guys had to say, because, we've had this discussion, about this 6.2%, already right now. And we had this similar discussion last year and the year before. And having you guys as new members, I really look forward to hearing some feedback from you guys.
Do you want me to go, Paula?
I am at a loss. Quite frankly, I mean, this is just such a huge undertaking, and I'm still trying to take it all in and figure out what the best way of approaching this would be. I really have in mind that cliff that Matt brings up, and it makes me really nervous. And like everybody else, I hate to see things being cut. I want to see all the things that need to be added being added. I'm not sure yet.
You're fitting right in, Paula, because that's pretty much how we are every year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just.
Yes, there really isn't.
I think for me, it would be super helpful to know, in addition to what students are at, the amount of students that are at each school, because it kind of helps with,
Yeah, I agree.
Whatnot. But also with it seems if we were to go back to the list for the elementary schools, like ed techs, special ed resource room, all of those sort of staff that we already know because of COVID and what kids have lost or have not gained or whatnot. It would be helpful to know, and I know it's kind of a loaded question, but kind of see what the staff is seeing with the students right now and what they're foreseeing is going to be needed for next school year to get us, because we were talking at the last meeting on Monday about summer school and everything that we're going to need to do to try to help these kids. So it almost seems like that kind of needs to be the focus, in my opinion, about making a budget for next school year. And again, this is my first budget season, but to me that just seems because is summer school even talked about in this budget, and would that be for this summer, or would that be for?
No, we have not put any summer school in this budget, and that was done with the idea of the federal funds that we do have are gonna, like we pointed out last meeting, that's going this summer.
Okay.
It's going the summer after and the summer after that, 21, 22, and the summer of 23.
September of 23.
Yes, is when it expires. So we're gonna have to be able to try to have a plan, and we're working on developing on what that exactly looks like. I'm for it.
Again, the silver lining of the crisis is more virtual learning, shared services amongst the sending schools, life skills. Students seem like they're sold on that, which we knew they should be. But what programs? We're sitting in the high school right now. What programs in the high school have limited number of students in the program? That maybe we could share that with other sending schools. So there's one instructor, 20 students instead of 7 instructors for 40 instructors. So our sending schools have similar problems.
Right.
Asking you and Paula about the budget, I remember my first year, it was like, oh my God, what did I sign up for? I'm embarrassed. I don't want to be a part of this. This is crazy. So, and I kind of still feel that way, right? We're all taxpayers.
Right.
Yeah.
Your home tax bill's going up.
And
you have direct impact on your own tax bill right now.
Oh, for sure.
And there's nothing easy about what we're trying to do here, because we are trying to deliver what we can and also paying attention to what exactly is going to be any burden on the taxpayer.
So just to be clear, so some of these, we could go so some of those requests or hopes and wishes and dreams for education, like the Ed Tech 3s, Ed Techs, literacy, those could potentially be covered by those funds that we were talking about on Monday, or no?
I think we could look at
Just
that.
to help bridge the gap.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things that you saw in one of the presentations was we have to be very upfront that if this position is only going to be a 1 year only,
Yeah.
or those things which, you know, there's importance for that transparency. You also worry, will that be limiting in terms of what you get for an applicant pool or what you've got to be able to fill for that? But yes, I think there's some things here that can help us that if we create, if we don't have the funds 2 or 3 years from now and they go away, then okay, but we've gotten 2 or more years out of something that we were ready to not have it now. So some of that's a balancing act between some of what the positions are.
Yeah, I think Amy hit on a really good point. Just like, as far as like using those federal funds, there's still gonna be needs next fall for remediation and all that.
Absolutely.
So we only have so much of those federal funds. So I think if we could get a handle on how much of that needs to be reserved for, well, I hate to say this, I almost don't want to say it out loud, but say we go into next fall and we're still in the same situation we are now, that's going to tap those federal funds much more than if we're getting back to some form of normalcy next fall.
Right.
So, you know, how much do we have that we can kind of slide and play around with to alleviate some of this pain for this year? You know, because that's kind of a starting point. If we look at it, we really don't have that much money to have some of these things coming under that. You know, then it's a different discussion than if we've got kind of a bunch of federal money we can kind of play around with. So, Paula, what were you going to say?
I think I was going to say something similar to what you just said. I just want to know, out of this wish list, how many of these things can be defined as a specific need, you know, whatever language that we need to present it in so we can have it covered by COVID. And then once the COVID situation is no longer here, then we won't really need those positions, or that's not part of the cliff, right? Because those positions are necessary for the next 2 or 3 years or however long this lasts. And then after that, we're not going to need that extra help.
I would say most of these listed items are things that are here for the long haul, and you're trying to use COVID funds to kind of mask it for a little while, which is really kind of silly. Because
hoping that in a couple of years we're better off and maybe we can fit it in the budget.
This conversation is going to be here for a long time. It's just different numbers, same problem. Until we bring more industry to Sanford.
But I'm saying, like, a nursing assistant, you know, is that needed? And that's something that could be covered with COVID money, no?
I would argue strongly that.
Well, what position was that?
The nursing assistant.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we would look at that and say, yes, that could absolutely fall in that.
That's worth gambling on and saying, let's worry about that in 3 years.
Well, that's something long term, as Amy put it. Like, you know, you want the junior high or the middle school really mirrors the high school now. So if you need a nursing assistant at the high school, you need a nursing assistant at the middle school.
Maybe more.
I would say more.
So, yeah.
Well, once again, and I am not, I'm sharing this information carefully, okay? Remember, here at the high school, we have 4 grades, but we also have an SRTC program in the morning and the afternoon. So you could be looking at it where some people, you know, might be saying, we also need some more additional help here. Because of when you start acting those, when there's nurse needs, those numbers are adding in. So when you're saying that there's 4 grades and 4 grades, there's also a context to it as well.
Well, you also have the acting students here, so that's a little bit more.
Well, they're part of our, they're part of our population, yeah.
Can I ask
the bottom
you
line is, yeah, Paula, go.
So my question is there some sort of definition or policy that describes what falls under COVID need specifically? What are the parameters for that?
We're still trying to, we're getting information on that. They're putting the applications out. The applications will be due at the end, in about a month, right, Cheryl? And that's when we can put what we have in for the applications, and that's where they can get approved.
Yeah, and the big key they keep saying is that, remember, you can't replace anything, and it needs to be because of COVID. If you need that item or that person because of COVID. So like very easily, we know we have 9 custodial positions that were needed during COVID. They fell under the CRF, but that was needed because of COVID. It was very easy to define. And we also had some teacher and nursing positions we used, same thing.
And I may dare say, because of COVID, we probably need a school psychologist, to be honest with you.
The school committee.
Yeah, no, I think probably a good homework assignment for us is to try to look at some of these and really try to prioritize them. That is this something that we feel meets, fits the application for it, and that we're going to put the application in for. And then share that with this group and for input and feedback for it. For example, you know, I could see adding 10 days to the school year for an administrative assistant. I can see IEP coordinator. I can see resource room. I can see the math interventionist, for example, the nursing assistant. Some of the other ones, maybe not so much, right? The Ed Tech 3 for support and transition, that might be more of a stretch.
So why don't you put a list together, the ones you think you can face the.
Yeah, what do you think you fall into COVID and what?
You know, I hate to be the, you know, keep bringing the white elephant into the room, but we're still at 6.2%.
Yeah, you're right. We still need to, but I think if we have that.
But if Matt, and the reason, Dawn, I bring that up, if Matt could also kind of give us some guidance for that number.
Yeah, well, what could be edited out?
Right.
It's the same drill.
It's tough, I think, with the existing budget, with what we have for what's already here, to say, well, we're gonna cover this position with COVID money for this next year, because we can justify that and bring that 6% down.
No.
Because then that's that cliff 2 years from now that you're in trouble with.
But we're not gonna be, you mean, you're talking existing positions?
I'm talking existing, yeah.
Existing, yeah, okay. That is the cliff.
Because that's kind of what Matt talked about with the cliff. That's really tempting to say, hey, we got this federal money, we can justify it with COVID, we can keep that 6% down pretty easily. But you're just kicking the can down the road to 2 years from now.
I don't support that. I think
and I agree.
It generally meets the criteria, then okay. You know, summer school, I'm all over that. That's in 100%.
That's easy.
I think the incremental needs for the students the next 2 years is going to eat up that federal funding. I mean, the services they're going to need, the psychology and the wellness support, the remediation, that's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of people to get these kids back up to where they need to be.
Yeah.
So
I think I can have a homework assignment would be trying to look at seeing this list that we have here. And I think the school committee needs a starting point. And so I can make some recommendations as a starting point to basically say, I'll start with some of those cuts. And we get that out, so now that 6.4 is headed down. Can we look at, are there some things in this budget that might be one-time expenses that we can pay for in other ways, like a current carryover or something that we have, to bring that down a little bit further? And then if there are going to be some things that we can use COVID funds for, being able to try to attach that there, because I don't want to just wipe it all out to a no increase or all zeros, because we're just kicking that can down the road. Some of those things I think we can be able to look at as far as making some adjustments to.
I think 6.4 is just a deal breaker. You're gonna get to 4.4 before you even start arm wrestling. Now you're down, I think you're 4.4, 2.4, in one for? I mean, those are I think the categories you gotta look at.
So, like, for example, remember how, not last year, but years before, and we gotta be careful about this, we used to come in and we had all that carryover. And then that carryover was now added as part of our budget under revenue. And that's all well and good as long as you're making that. But when you weren't, and remember, last year in the budget we're in right now, there's no carryover because we came up short the year before. And so we also have to be careful about that in terms of, what about that new principal and interest payment on the bond? Okay, there's a big chunk of what we're looking at that before we even started this year, we were already behind. Is that something we can look at putting some money there from carryover, for example? To be putting that towards that, to be able to, it's kicking it down the road, but at the same time, it might be more of a safer way to do it.
See, for me with the carryover, aren't we looking at, like, if you go into next year's budget, I would almost want that same carryover amount to come out at the end of the year next year, just to kind of set, so you don't have a zero balance in your checkbook kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not clear on what the are you talking, is the carryover that you're referring to the 900
Yes.
plus, and that on average other schools have about 500, so where is what I felt like I heard Cheryl say.
No, we have about 900,000 in the plus, and that is about 1.8%. And most schools, they say you can have 3%.
Okay.
And so we're actually a little bit low with that carryover. And I think that gets to what Dawn was saying. That's dangerous when you start looking at,
start banking on it.
yeah, when there's things that could pop up that you want to be able to. And that's a tough one because I want to make sure whatever burden we put on the taxpayers, we're not just trying to use it as fluff or a buffer. It's more of how you run a school department this size.
It's an emergency fund.
Yeah.
Because stuff happens, boilers break, it's a home fund.
It's the difference of living paycheck to paycheck and having a little bit of money in the bank.
Yeah.
So to be fiscally responsible, you really should be ending the year with with something in the bank account.
Yeah.
Which is essentially what that carryover. So it took me a few years to kind of get the head, like when we first started talking about it, because they used to use it a little more like that, like you said. Like
We never had it.
We owed
We owed
$3 million. The city is
1.5
Well, that's true. No, wait.
You didn't have one.
I'm thinking of the,
For years, we never had
We
it.
just took it.
Well, it wasn't there.
So spent it anyway.
Yeah, we did, we just spent it. 20 straight years, I think.
so pretty much the bottom line is that we always want or need more money to really deliver the education that we want to, but we don't have it. So it's really you only have so many resources. Where do you want to allocate those? And that's what this discussion gets to, is where do we want to take what little money we do have and funnel it to hopefully make a difference.
So have we seen tonight what cuts the administrators have said they could live without, or they could live with?
Well, what you've gotten is these are the additions were from the
These are the
administrators.
additions, right, but
The cuts are coming from Matt and your team, right? Is that coming?
Right, this is in the
So-
budget. I've let people know that that's in my radar as something that I'm feeling like, and the athletics, I'm not trying to cut freshman athletics.
Yeah.
That's one that we know has always been on the table, so that's where
That's the
I'm
number
putting that there. I'm not
associated.
trying to be able to look at that. So, at the end of the day, we just, if I get confirmation about the ed tech at the Morrison Center and the technology that Johnson controls, we're down 0.6% right there.
Yeah, so it's,
So there's some progress that we've made.
so this is like with you and Paula coming in, Amy, fresh eyes. That's where kind of this giant book comes in.
Yeah.
If you start diving into that and seeing where stuff's being spent, and then your own experience in the school, you can start raising. You guys are here to raise those questions and say, hey, I was looking through this.
Yeah.
Why is money on this? Is this a potential cut? Matt's really good about it. But another couple set of eyes are great. And
well, I guess that was my point though, is that I expected that each principal, we were gonna have like that, basically, these are the things, basically this is what happens in my job. So, every year you're kind of going like, this is what we can maybe live without. Definitely, like I expected to see a list of like things that if they had to do a painful cut, they would be willing to go first.
Yeah.
And this and that.
Well, that's one thing I've brought up with the budget before is we're almost looking at it like a running rate kind of budget. So
Right.
this stuff's already in the budget. So to go in and say, well, what if you didn't have this position? Or what if you with kind of a zero base ground up? There's a little more difficult conversation to have with the administrators.
Well, and to get to Jonathan's point is if you have a class in SRTC that is only running on 3 students, how would we know that going through this book?
Right.
I'm not sure you wouldn't.
We wouldn't.
But that's a
So-
good question to put to Matt and the team and say like,
And the thing about, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, the thing about SRT courses, we're funded at 100% of them, 101%.
Yeah, that's kind of as an example, that's probably not the best one because John's right.
Okay.
We get that paid for by the state. That's 101% every year back.
It's a bigger discussion to
That's
say,
more of a-
are there other programs we could be offering that would be more
Right.
popular?
But as far
Or
as
why
the
is that
budget
one
one-
not popular?
But as far as a budget conversation, it's not gonna make that much of a
That's why
difference, like John
I
says.
use that,
But as
look
a-
and don't spend a lot of time there.
As a
Right.
better example would be what Jonathan was talking about. Once we started doing distance learning, we were talking about, okay, well, say we've got 4 kids here, they're taking calculus 2. Noble's got 3 kids that want to take
Yeah, I
Calc
get
2.
that,
Could we do something where we share with all the districts and instead of each of us having a teacher, there's one teacher that's teaching the class of 16 kids spread across the 6 or 7 schools.
Right.
And are there savings to be had there? I think that's more of a long-term initiative. I think it's something we need to be working towards, but maybe coming into this next year, is there something we can get in place quickly that would do that, or
Well,
online?
I guess I talked about when Stacy came and talked about the bridge program. So like going through those numbers, how many kids are coming to school, you know what I mean? Like, and the staff and this and that. I guess it's just getting down to the nitty gritty of the ratios of staff to students, rent, this, that, and the other, electric, you know what I mean? Like, is it really?
And for me, I think that's a year-long conversation. Like, we really should be talking budget stuff year-long, so we get through this. And, Matt, to his credit, has done a really good job, as far as I'm concerned, the last couple of years doing that. Like, sharing Nicole Ivy with Noble. I was gonna say Marshwood, and I knew that was wrong. That's very innovative. That's a cost savings.
Yeah.
But that's something where we're not just gonna sit down here in the 1 month that we look at it and come up with big ideas like that. That's the long term, you're working at that year round. So like, I think the elementary bridge program, like as we get the younger grade bridge program in, geez, are we gonna be able to like hammer that through during this 1 week of budget stuff? Maybe not, but looking forward, that's something we work on through the year. So when you go through the budget process next year, that's already kind of a savings that you've built in. Because next year is gonna be the exact same discussion we're having right now. It has been every year we've been on this.
To use the example of the bridge program, we did have Stacy come in a while ago. That was by design. We do have some things. We tasked her to be able to see what that cost was, and we do have some advantages on the surface for that we know exactly. There's a chance we have space for it. Some places don't have that. That's usually a variable. We have space. The other thing is we have a pretty good idea about who the kids would be going into that program. That right now we are putting them in outside placements that we can put a cost to. And so you look at it and say, these kids won't go there, they'll come here. That's the money we're saving. Can we run the program that we want to meet the kids' needs where we can? So there's some advantages there. And then when you look at it to also say, wait a minute, we can do it for our kids and at that cost. And then we can look at it also with, well, we've got other districts that may want to send in, and there's some potential revenue there. And so I feel like we're a little ahead on that. Right now it's hard because we are in COVID. And so it's hard where everything is on a day-to-day mode more than it is future planning. But I also think that we have, we're looking at remote students right now, okay? We don't have the time we want to maybe go with other districts, but could we look at us offering a remote option? One of the things about remote is if we're here at the high school or the middle school, you're probably looking at a class size somewhere in there that ranges between 16 and 24, 25. If you're doing a remote academy, you might be able to put that number up higher. So you might be able to, that way, not need as many teachers. Okay, and so that's something that to think about in terms of how you might be able to transfer that over to, oh, wait a minute here. Are there kind of ways, because there's not an easy thing on there that anyone wants to say, yes, get it out. We've already gone through and made a lot of those cuts. Every cut we have now reaches somewhere and there's an impact. And are there other ways that we can be able to try to be creative and look at other ways of trying to still have the need to be able to meet our student needs, but try to create our cost down, keep our costs down.
Gotcha. One thing I do want to put out on the table, not to put like another addition on there, but this is something I've always been a proponent of, and I'll continue to be. I think the arts in the district don't have representation at the director level. So you've got the individual band teachers, you've got the individual art teachers, and they roll up to each of their schools' administration. So you don't end up with a district-wide support for that. They're trying to work their needs through their administrator, who may have no idea really what the music or chorus or art needs are. Whereas I've always felt strongly that we should have a district-wide director of that. But that's yet another cost, and so one of those things would be great to do.
Yeah, and how I respond to that is absolutely there's a justification for that. The challenge is we're at 6.4%.
Exactly.
So is that something that someone, guess what? I'm guessing Sanford is not unique in that need or that desire. But maybe some of our surrounding schools could come back and say, hey, maybe we'd like to have a director of music, K through 12. And does that mean you have someone that you share with another district? Now, that gets tight. That's tough because we get to be territorial sometimes, right? Our art program is better than your art program, or we don't want to turn into habit. And so, but some of that thinking might have to be, is that the way we could get a resource like that? As opposed to, because the idea of saying we're going to do it ourselves, it's almost dead on arrival unless
there's advantages to regionalize something like that. Yeah. When
there
you have
are
more
advantages of regionalizing everything.
Yeah.
I don't think you can just talk art. You got to talk science, math, English. You have to have larger classes in the performing arts center. You got to think about education completely different than we have historically.
How much more does the director cost?
Can I jump in here for a second? I've got.
We forgot you were there, Paula.
Thanks. So I just want to go back to the idea of sharing teachers with other schools and everything. I think that is a great idea when you think about, how this pandemic has brought hybrid school and virtual learning to the forefront. But I get a little nervous when we start talking about that, because the feedback that we got from the teachers was that the hybrid virtual teaching is really difficult and really frustrating. And there are so many, the devil is in the details, if you will. Theoretically, it sounds great, but I have to say, I've got kids in high school, middle school, and elementary school, and sitting around them or even helping them with the assignments they're getting, the way the classes are going, it's really tough. I don't know, the details would be what's the ratio then? If you're sharing a teacher, what are the number of students that each teacher is going to have if you have some classes in a virtual world? And there's just a lot of details there that would need to be really discussed and really thought about, and we need some serious input from the people that are going to have their boots on the ground.
And Paula, that's a great point, because we've reached out to another school district, and we were looking at trying to set up a regional service center with them, looking at getting the benefits of that, and also trying to look at a remote academy. Okay, similar to what you see with some of the charter schools or some of the full online schools. Why do we have kids going there that we're losing subsidy for, that we can meet their needs after what we've done? So we put it together, and we had the meetings, we had the high school principals and the school counselors meet, and great idea, devil's in the details, to the point that we can't pull that together right now. We've then pulled back. You saw the survey results last Monday, that there is some interest there. Now, there's also concern that we have that people are going to be missing out on some things if they're going full remote. And so we're looking at doing a remote option for us to keep that going, and putting off regionalizing with another school until we can go and really dig into that, because you're now, worlds collide, right? You start talking about how you do things and how that school does things.
Time out. We weren't even talking about this 2 years ago. We are now. I'm not saying the whole damn school. I'm saying a class here, a class there. Walk before you run. The fact that we're talking about it is gigantic.
Yeah.
I get the problems.
It's definitely a long-term initiative.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think anybody expects it. And boom, it's there. And you're right. I think you have to make sure you're going to do it right. Because if you do it wrong to start out with, it's just going to fail. I mean, you have to hit the ground running with it and make sure it's 100%. Right.
So it almost would have to be some job.
Well, and I think
there's so much detail to have to work out something logistically like that. I think it would literally have to hire somebody to be their focus, or half-time or whatnot.
SRTC is the example.
Yeah.
We are doing
And we've been doing it for years.
Did you have anything
That
else,
doesn't help
Paula?
us on the 6.4%.
I don't want to neglect Paula again.
Oh, thank you.
She's probably having dinner right now.
So do we have,
The other, I'm
people
sorry.
that you want? And Paul.
I'm sorry, there was something else too, is that I feel like, so we're sitting here and we're talking about the budget, and we're trying to make sure that we don't go over the cliff, which is very fiscally responsible. And we're trying to figure out how to make things better right now, considering the situation that we're in with COVID. But then we also have to think about the negative consequences of COVID, how things have changed right now because of COVID, but then also education in general and what we can deliver. And I feel like sometimes we're talking so much about how to keep this hybrid idea going, and how we're gonna, it's basically changing a whole system. And I worry because yes, everybody has worked extremely hard. Everybody's doing the best they can. But again, if you really sat down, and I know we had this survey, but if you really sat down and were able to have a cup of coffee with 10 parents at a time or something, and 10 teachers at a time, you might be surprised, we might be surprised about the comments that we hear, the details about what their days are like. And so I worry that we're sort of jumping on this idea of switching things over to hybrid or something more like this, because this is what we have right now, and we are not going to be able to go fully back. But at the same time, what we have right now is really skating on thin ice.
Paul, I don't think we're talking about going like a full hybrid. I think it's about talking about having a hybrid option, or having part of the day be hybrid, or one class. Like, kid, instead of going and sitting in front of a teacher for their physics class, they're going on a Zoom with the regional physics teacher, you know,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
And even so, but then we were just saying earlier, then we better make sure that that hybrid process that we are selling is actually really going to work. Can't keep stumbling the way we're stumbling now, because then we're just going to have more negative consequences that keep dragging along behind us.
Yeah, exactly, I agree with you, so.
So I do think it would be helpful to have, like, Beth talk about the curriculum, Beth Lambert, about special ed, maybe, like we were starting to bring up. I personally feel like it would be super helpful, because those are some big items. In particular, I think special ed, because there's so many needs that is on this list. And what was curriculum, special ed, maintenance, what was the fourth one you referenced?
Technology. Yeah, and it's, I'm glad you brought that up, Matt, because I think I was talking with Jonathan the other day about it, like, a while ago, we used to kind of have, like, everybody would parade through, and you'd have all the administrators do a dog and pony show, and all that. It just took a lot of time. I think focusing on the 4 areas that are like the big hitters and have the most stuff, I think that's a good way to go about doing it. As much as I love, like, we used to kind of take this budget process, it was a time to kind of showcase some of the stuff happening in the schools. So we'd have these long presentation nights where you'd have all the elementary administrators come in and talk about their budgets and what they needed. And it just kind of, you got to that same conclusion at the end. Yeah, we'd love to give you what you're asking for, but we don't have any money. So you just don't have the resources. So rather than go through all of that just to say no at the end of it, I like the summary, and then I like hitting kind of the big points.
Okay, so I can start for our next 4 meetings. I'll identify, we'll schedule one of those 4.
Yeah, see what works best for them.
Yeah, we can be able to.
We'll do one each of the nights, and
I'll come back with some homework here to see where we are with that 6.4 number.
Yeah, I think
and not with just some recommendations or some things to be able to come back and look at.
Well, I think we need also, like, out of the COVID money, the federal funds coming in, kind of an estimate of how much you think you're gonna need to spend for, like, remediation and summer school. Do you think you're at that point yet, or is that?
No, that is.
That's off a ways?
Yeah, that would be very much, we're working on it, but, that's.
So maybe then, like you were saying, just some of those, incremental positions where you could potentially use federal funds to pay for those, because I think a number of those fall under remediation anyways.
Yep.
And I guess, do we want you to go down that road of stuff in the existing budget, what you could pay out of federal funds? Do we want to go that way, guys, you think, or no? I mean, I guess we're probably going to at least have the information.
Yeah.
I was just saying, out of the federal funds, places where Matt thinks that he could pull stuff out of the existing budget if we want to end up going there.
Yep.
Being fully cognizant that it
Yes,
could create problems in the future.
I think we kind of concluded that a little bit ago.
Okay.
I would love to put a placeholder in for summer school. I'd like to really confirm that. And-
Well, I mean,
and be
yeah.
talking about a plan for it.
Yeah, a lot of those, ESSER 2 funds that we haven't put the application in yet, those, yeah,
Well, how does that work, like, budget wise? Like, do you have to have that money planned in next year's budget and then the federal funds in as revenue? Or can you just, as the federal funds come in, then use it for summer school and stuff? I'm just thinking the process and legally.
What's that, Paula?
go ahead, Cheryl.
It's a special revenue fund, and it's on a reimbursement, so you have to do an application, tell them what you're gonna use the money for, and get the program approved, and then you run your program and you send bills that have those costs included, and they reimburse you.
Thanks, Cheryl. So it can exist separate from our regular operating budget then, right?
Right, yep.
Cool, that makes it a little easier then.
No, when I talk about the financials every month, I talk about there's like 23 or 24 accounts that are special revenue funds. You'll see them all listed there towards the bottom.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks, Cheryl.
Welcome.
Okay, is there anything else we're looking for from Matt before the next meeting that we didn't summarize?
We have to get, we know the number, we have to now find what we can do and can't be adding without something offsetting.
Cross our fingers about the technology piece and the,
Amy, would it help you if we had just like a quick spreadsheet that said the schools and the number of students and staff,
Yes.
that kind of stuff?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think we're kind of used to it from the last few years anyway, so we kind of have that number in the back of our heads, but that should be easy enough to pull together, right? Matt?
Well, remember, we're in transit, because there are gonna be some people
Oh,
moving
that's
next
true.
year.
Yeah.
Because Willard doesn't have kindergarten, but yeah.
Yeah, you
we
just get in the
can work towards
ballpark,
that,
yeah. You guys don't need anything like to the 10th
no, I
place or
mean, my
anything.
understanding is that roughly it was gonna be 500 per each elementary school when the
I'll
dust
shook
settled.
out, yeah.
We get that information.
Alrighty then, anything else from anybody before we wrap it up for today? I'll take that as a no. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
So moved.
Second, motion by John, second by Jonathan. All in favor? All in favor? Is that in favor, Paula? You have to verbally say it.
All right, thank you.